Hello, fellow humans. Welcome to Beyond Words, a science-based podcast exploring the mysteries of language, music, and cognition. The following is a conversation with Dr. Daniel Bowling, assistant professor at Stanford and director of the Music and Brain Health Lab. Dan's work explores one of the most fascinating frontiers in neuroscience, how music, rhythm, and the human voice can be harnessed to improve mental health, with a special focus on anxiety and depression. In this episode, we dig into the biological roots of music, from the emotional tones in a caregiver's voice to the universal pull of rhythm, and how these elements connect with the brain's reward system and with language. We explore music as both an evolutionary inheritance and a powerful therapeutic tool, touching on topics like the ISO principle, emotion in speech, and what makes music such a unique bridge between mind, body, and social connection. So what lies beyond the words we speak? Tune in and find out. How's it going, everyone? So this is going to be the first episode in this new series, and I'm super excited that we have the incredible Dr. Daniel Bowling here today. My name is Garrett Oyama. I'm a musician, a practicing SLP, and now a PhD student with an interest in all things language, music, and cognition. And just a little bit about Dr. Bowling. So the newly anointed, that's not the right word, but assistant professor at Stanford and the director of the Music and Brain Health Lab at the Stanford School of Medicine. And his transitional research harnesses the neural effects of music to develop novel music-based treatments for health and wellness, with a particular focus on anxiety and depression in young adults. And his approach integrates interdisciplinary training in neuroscience, psychophysics, evolutionary biology, bioacoustics, psychiatry, and clinical science to establish a foundation for music and human biology that can serve as a rational basis for medical translation. So just before we get started, a couple of items. Most of these upcoming podcasts, including today's, will include an accompanying course on speech therapy PD that is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. Just some necessary disclosures. We each get a small compensation from speech therapy PD for this podcast. And also, we may discuss some of the music treatment paradigms that Dr. Bowling is creating, such as spirit tune. So without further ado, Dr. Bowling, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much, Garrett, for the introduction. Yeah, great to be here. Looking forward to talking about music, language, and cognition and all the interesting intersections.
Amazing. I always ask the guests a little bit about their origin story. What got you into this field and in music in general?
So, I guess I hope it's not too long, but if it is, I'm sure you'll tell me. Yeah, so, I have a long history in music. I started playing piano when I was a young kid and did classical training. I also was doing some speech arts stuff. So, I had great teachers and learned a lot about like voice projection and like how you can use your voice to affect people and move people, which I thought was really interesting and has overlaps with music, of course. Yeah, and then, music was always great. I loved it, but, I never quite understood the rules. There's clear that something very interesting was going on, but, I didn't, why certain tones and modes are associated with certain emotions, particular harmonies, why they sound good. Um, I took classes, music theory, and it was interesting, but seemed pretty arbitrary. So it wasn't until I later got to graduate school in neuroscience when I found my PhD advisor who was interested in perception. He had worked a lot in vision. He was transitioning to audition. And so we were starting to think about like, oh, well, music is a major example of, how humans hear things and why. And we started to address some of these questions that were long puzzling to me in terms of biology and neuroscience, which I thought was totally fascinating and really satisfying because it provided some foundation for thinking about why these really powerful things exist in music and for why music is so important and moves us in the way that it does.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and that mystery is like definitely been on my mind for so long. Just how, even almost innately, like babies, infants are tuned into the musical aspects of their parents' voice. They show certain preferences for music. Like music creates this, emotional cascade. And what is that resonance? It is so mysterious and cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's something like, yeah, like, so I've got three young kids, and like, it's just been staggering how responsive they are initially to tone of voice, like, because
Mm,
of course they don't understand what you're saying at the beginning. But like the way, like, if you introduce some roughness into your voice, or if you talk in a pointed way, or if you talk in a soothing voice, like, it just completely modulates their whole being, And so that's really interesting how responsive they are to that stimulus. And that develops very early on, basically like before birth. Um, some of it, anyways. Preference for mother's voice, preference for native tongue. Um, but yeah, and then music, right? So like if you start to sing, very simple, or just to kind of intone your like motherese, right? Like they really tune in, you know, and it's
yeah.
like it's so kind of magnetic. And um, they're the way that they deal with, like, simple songs, like how captivating those are,
Mm.
um, with YouTube now, like there's so much of that stuff, and it's like it's a little concerning,
Yeah.
but but it's still, it's really interesting.
That's definitely another issue I'd like to ask you about maybe later. Just the difference between something that's a more rich interpersonal interaction versus something that's maybe digitally, like the medium is digital, and maybe there's less, this back and forth. And but yeah, I wonder how much that stimulus makes a difference. But yeah, maybe before we get it, it's kind of easy to see that music has all these powerful effects, even when we're just born. And so it's easy to kind of see how it could be maybe used as this medicine. Um, but I thought that maybe we could wax philosophical at the start and talk about even what music is, because I remember in your talk at UCLA, you kind of talked about the difficulty of pinning this slippery thing down. Like, what is it exactly?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, music is a lot of things, right? Music's a lot of things to a lot of people. And I mean, part of getting off on this trajectory was like I was at a workshop early on in my PhD, and like it was all about music and the brain. And like somebody put their hand up at the beginning and was like, "What is music?" And just nobody could come up with an answer. So it was like, "Oh, well, that seems like an issue." Um, and, you know, over the years, like all kinds of different definitions have been offered, like it when you hear it, or, after kind of a move against like Western colonialism, like was this kind of idea that there is no unified concept of music and every culture has something different, and kind of led to a place of total relativism, which, is, I think, swing of the pendulum too far. There is something about music. There are a lot of cross-cultural similarities. Just not to say that there aren't differences, but there are strange things like scales that appear in, our scales like are also present in India, and their music traditions. Like the Japanese and the Scottish are like singing this using the same pentatonic scale. Like, minor chords are found in the Amazon, like it's there's something going on there. And um so, I think that like how we can make progress on this is, by defining music in biological terms.
Hmm.
It's not going to satisfy, everyone. Like it's not, these terms may not be the thing, right? Like if you ask like Sting or something what he thinks music is, right? It's going to be something different. But um, it gives a foundation in science, which allows us to study it empirically. And so, what is that foundation and what is that definition? I mean, I think music is essentially a form of social communication that is rooted in kind of the evolutionary biology of the voice as kind of the initial and primary tonal stimulus.
Hmm. Hmm. Awesome. I love this kind of exploring this question of evolution too. And there's a lot of people that have different views, like the Steven Pinker auditory cheesecake sort of. It's this super stimulus, this byproduct of something, rather than like an adaptation. But maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like you're like the evidence that you bring forth sort of suggests that there may be these more adaptive biological functions. Maybe can you talk about where you stand on this issue a little
Yeah,
bit?
yeah, yeah. So, I think that this like I think that this kind of debate over like adaptiveness, like I don't know how productive it is, and I think it's also like you can't really resolve it.
Mm,
You know, I think like what really happens in biology and in evolution is like something called exaptation, where like something that was initially for something else becomes used for something else, right? So like the larynx is a perfect example. So like what we use to intone our voice, right? Our voice box, right? Like you'll know as a speech therapist, many of the people will know here, like this organ which this complex of muscle and cartilage and nerves and blood and it's like highly derived organ is very complicated. It like started its trajectory as a safety valve in fish. Like so a lungfish has a little thing in its throat that protects its lungs when it goes underwater. And this tiny little simple valve, which basically just like a kind of sphincter muscle over the 400 million years that separates us from the lungfish, like has evolved into this thing that we blow air through and this membranes that kind of vibrate harmonically and allow us to make these sounds. So, the voice, presumably that's a process of adaptation for communication. Um, is music adaptive? Well, like where's the boundary between music and speech? You know, um,
yeah.
you know, I'll also say, so like there are lots of things that we can talk about about music that may or may not be adaptive. I don't know how we do experiments to figure that out. And that's part of the reason why I left that particular field is like, what can we do? But I should say, Pinker's cheesecake thing, I used to be like, haha, this is silly, but like it's not really like, cheesecake is awesome. And like
Yeah.
it's based on like there's biological underpinnings. Like we like sugar and fat, it's awesome. And we don't it doesn't mean like the idea that I mean that's adaptive. Like our desires for sugar and fat are adaptive, right? So like is liking cheesecake non-adaptive or some sort of like does it not have biological roots? Is it totally just like of cultural origin? Like it's always both, right? We know
Yeah.
this is the case. So it's so cliche to be like it's always nature and nurture, but it's like the pitting those two things against each other apparently is so like such a kind of attractive like cognitive trap that like it's kind of hard to get away from, despite
Right.
that's what you learn as a first year psychology student, right?
Yeah. It seems like the more I dig into all the questions, it's always like, oh, it's both. and it's
Yeah,
neither. And it's like, there's so many nuances.
yeah,
And, it feels like this rich interaction across evolutionary time between, an organism and their environment and how those things shape each other and either, across evolutionary time or even in developmental time, like they seem to come together to kind of shape the organisms.
yeah, totally, right? Like, environment ex affects gene expression, right? And
Right.
one of the smart things I heard when I was like in this field is that like uh genes don't code for behaviors, right? Uh or like something genes don't code for music, genes code for proteins.
Mm,
You know? So it's like hard to talk about like music being like innate, right? Even though the points that you made earlier stand, right? So
totally. Yeah. Thank you for that reframe. Yeah. So there's this awesome also in your talk, there's this really cool study that I think is getting back to your kind of wanting to root things in biology. There's a really cool study about music driving the brain's reward system. Could you talk a bit about that?
yeah, so in many ways, like that's probably the most important discovery in music neuroscience, period. I could say like over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of progress in different ways, and not even just in neuroscience, but kind of this realization that there's a neurobiological reality to what we all experience when we listen to music. I shouldn't say we all, but what a lot of people most people experience when they listen to music is it's just very real from a brain perspective. And, that shouldn't be surprising, right? Like we know that music is pleasurable, but like the fact that we can demonstrate that music stimulates the same system that is responsible for all like motivated behavior essentially, right? So, and especially in the context of pleasure. So like, enjoying food, drugs of abuse, sex, like these things are tightly coupled to this kind of core brain circuitry. And music, lights it up. So, um, it's really interesting. And there are some really kind of interesting philosophical questions about why that is that relate, I think, to the voice and its role in social communication and connection. Um, but again, it's just like the other thing that it does is like it makes music medically relevant, right?
Mm.
Especially in mental health, because like the reward system is so fundamental to our behavior that it's also fundamental to the ways that things can go wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and the fact that music directly modulates this system opens up all kinds of doors to, um, medical translation, medical application that what once might have appeared non-scientific or too artsy is actually very much a real thing, a tractable thing, and something that can be seriously leveraged.
Very cool. Yeah, this was popping up for me as you were talking is that some researchers talk about infant vocalizations when you're young as like a form of foraging, which is kind of this dopaminergically driven behavior. And I wonder if the like maybe a, a bunch of reasons also with this, but maybe a reason that music, the fact that it does trigger these reward centers also encourages infant vocalizations because you're encouraging this type of seeking for sonic input that you then maybe want to imitate, and that is super relevant and contains information that is adaptive for you and for also
Yeah.
for your own vocal development because you know music can act, we've talked about this before with another guest, but it can act as like a kind of a better template for imitation for a young child because the vowel space is extended. There's like it's hyper articulated. It's slower. If I talked like this, it'd be weird, and no one talks like that. But you could sing with those extended vowels, and
Yeah.
infant that may be one of the only places that infants hear that sort of template. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And that's such an interesting idea. I never thought about like babbling in like the context of like foraging. Um, but I think yeah, you're right. Like motivated behavior, seeking contact, seeking connection, all tied up with sound and tone, and the kind of, scaffold that's provided by musicalizing speech, right? So
Mm.
it's like already like the boundary between music and speech is vague, right? Like you can take my voice and you can auto-tune it a little bit, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is super musical, right?
Yeah.
Or you can snap it to a rhythmic grid and
Yeah.
you can make it into like to rap or something,
Yeah,
So
speech to song illusion. If you just
yeah.
replay it, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so Diana Deutsch like always makes this point, speech is so musical. Um, and sometimes that is really apparent and sometimes not, but in the way that we speak to infants, it's very clear that we're exaggerating what might be called musical features, right? Um, and the way I think about that is basically like kind of imposing like a certain amount of regularity in tone and in time,
Mm.
so making things more like slowing it down, really landing on the stresses, extending out the tones, making things a little bit more stable. It's not like Motherese is exactly like singing. There's a lot of continuity there, but yeah, I tend to think about the role of that type of communication in these terms of engaging the infant's mind in a kind of musical way.
Mm. It does feel like this scaffold, like it's like the training wheels of speech.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Um,
so cool.
there's this other thing, right, which is like in with it comes to mind when you talk about this is like, like one conception of what your brain is trying to do when you deal with language is you've kind of got all these different neural oscillations that are happening in your auditory system and between your auditory system and your motor system, and they're happening at different time scales. For example, like at the syllable rate, at the word rate, at the phrase rate. And there's some evidence that like, so that when you hear speech, that like these oscillations are trying to kind of like glom on to what's happening to the input, and they facilitate understanding and processing because it's like your brain is getting on to the rhythm of what's happening, and it's
Mm,
happening at different time scales. And
mm,
speech, like, you know, one of the old ideas about speech is that it's not rhythmic, like in the way that music is, right? Like music is more rhythmic than speech because it's like, typically there's like a
yeah.
beat, but speech doesn't really have a beat. But at the same time, like it does have a rhythm, it's less predictable, but if you look at the timing of, the amplitude envelope of speech, a bunch of people talking, like there is a frequency peak in kind of like how frequently things occur. And so, it has this rhythmic quality and it's very
Mm,
useful for understanding. And if
yeah.
you hear somebody who, well, you would know more about this than me, but has some rhythmic interruption in their speech, sometimes it can be very hard to understand them, right? And
Definitely.
so music is, again, it's like on the other side, it takes it a step further, right? So it's like now this stimulus is like very predictable, and like part of your brain's prediction and satisfaction of these things that unfold in time is maybe part of the reason it's so rewarding, right? On
Mm,
one level.
mm, mm. Yeah, it's like when you're I think when you're learning, I'm just taking a music analogy, but when you're learning to play an instrument, it's like really tough when you pick up a guitar for the first time and it's just like to make one note takes all of your skills, and then maybe even then you can't get a note even to ring out. But sometimes having that like if you were to play with even a piano or something that's a little bit easier to get tones out of easily, there's this feeling of like, wow, I'm doing something. There's this mastery, there's this gripping of the environment. I feel like music's almost that way, where your brain is like, it's it's trying to grip the environment all the time as a infant in the sonic world, let's say. and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like when you get into that regular rhythm and it feels like, oh, I know what's going on, like maybe there's some sort of like joy there in
Yeah,
this terms of like mastery or something. I
yeah.
don't know if that makes
Super.
sense. Sorry, I'm getting a little
No, no, I think that's
speculative, but
cool. Well, you
um,
have insights from your experience. Yeah, that's interesting.
it was so cool hearing about this brain reward system, because it is in some sense, it's like obvious. Oh yeah, I love music. There should be something happening neurobiologically, but to just have it as clearly imaged and something we know about, I think makes everything, like you're saying, it makes it more. You can make an argument that, hey, you can actually use music as this tool for emotional regulation,
Right.
and all these different things. So yeah, I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about how you went from understanding this neurobiology to then um, kind of showing how we can leverage this understanding to
Yeah,
help?
yeah. Um, yeah, like I guess like one of the things like I like to say when speaking to general audiences about this is like, the science is really important, but like let's not forget like the role of the artists here, right? And like how much they've done, right? So like, who are the experts at using music to modulate emotion, right? Like musicians, right? Listeners, right? So like people use music to modulate emotion everywhere. It's one of the main reasons people listen to music. And people are varying how good they are at it, right? Or how intentional they are with it, right? And like so if you're the person who's like lucky enough to like have a big record library and have spent the time indexing it and know like, oh, I feel like this, I want to listen to this piece right now, like great, you know. And I bet you're using that for your mental health, right? Like I know I do. So there's this kind of background, which is like the facts on the ground, like musicians are awesome at using music to modulate emotion. That's a huge part of their success. And people everywhere take part in this, you know? Um, but also like it's not necessarily accessible to everybody, and it's also like not our culture's like typical approach towards thinking about music, because we tend to think about it instead as entertainment or something that's just about like enjoyment or recreation. So there's a therapeutic reality to it, like already on the ground. So yeah, so okay, that being said, like transitioning back to the neurobiology and the science. So, what I came to realize when I shifted from kind of this more basic science research in music that taught me all about how music is a fundamental piece of social communication, and music is like modulates your emotional circuitry, your limbic system. Music stimulates reward. Then when I came into a more applied setting, when I came back to the United States, I had been abroad studying this stuff, came back to the United States as a instructor at Stanford in the medical school in psychiatry. I started to study mental health, and very quickly realized that like, oh, there's like very close overlap between these things that music does and these core dimensions of mental health: social function, mood and emotion, reward, pleasure seeking, addiction, right? Like these concepts are like deeply intertwined. And then also like all of the kind of therapies that are in psychiatry like target these systems, like let's teach you how to cognitively, modulate and regulate your emotional systems. And um, let's uh, let's use certain drugs to modulate, serotonin or dopamine transmission, or norepinephrine transmission. And so yeah, there's this overlap, and um, it can be used systematically because we know we can try to predict and understand the types of music that people are using to affect this system and these systems, and we can try to supply them in a predictable way and make them available so that people can engage with them for treatment.
Hmm.
And there's an educational component to that too, which is, like, teaching people a bit about how to use it, something I
Hmm.
wish we did more with children. But then there's also like providing the tools.
Yeah, that's so cool. I know the one that's definitely, something already that so many speech therapists, myself included, would benefit from because, you have so many kids that it's typically not just like there's this like isolated speech and language thing that's going on. There's a lot. And just, I think, with general mental health disorders on the rise, like for youth, like depression, anxiety, things like that. You work with a lot of kids that have a lot of things going on. They're emotionally dysregulated a lot of times coming to the speech room. I don't know if other therapists have had that, but just that in itself is like pretty invaluable tool that if you're able to like kind of help to or facilitate emotional regulation
Yeah.
to even get there, that's great. Is there anything about attention that music can potentially aid with? Help?
Yeah, so I'd say this is like a, like growing field of research. Yeah, music can modulate your performance, right? So especially on tasks that have some sort of repetitive element, um, or if you need to stay focused and I tend to think of it as like for more kind of rote tasks, like where it is very repetitive, but it's not necessarily the case. Um, when you're dealing with like, if you're doing something a little bit deeper or more like where you're integrating information, like I often use like really ambient music in those settings, just sometimes because it provides some like enjoyment and
Hmm.
reward as a background feature and can kind of help keep me motivated. But in terms of like focus in particular, and conditions like ADHD, there's some evidence that certain types of music can help.
Hmm.
And there's efforts to design types of music that are, for example, like have strong repetitive rhythm that's engaging and, minimally distracting tonal features, not lyrical, no kind of sharp attacks, acute onsets and changes that pull your attention. And there's evidence that this type of music can be supportive for performance and tasks that require focus
Oh,
and
wow.
attention. Yeah.
Yeah. Is this related to, so there's a lot of, and it's hard to tell what has a scientific basis or not, but there's a lot of, on YouTube, it's like, for whatever, this hurts brainwave music to, facilitate your attention. How much evidence is there to support that, certain types of
Yeah.
music can help to bring about certain brainwave states?
Yeah. So I think there is evidence and it's kind of coming along steadily, but it's like totally disconnected from like what's being offered and what's being like advertised and like what's being like proffered on YouTube. That stuff is not necessarily based in science and it's also not necessarily helpful, right? Like as anybody will know from like testing it out. Like some stuff is good. You find something that works for you, by all means use it. Um, but it's just like the advertising is like running way ahead of the science, right? So
Yeah. Also, the ads in the video, it'll just like, I'll be in a state and they'll just pop in with like a really loud Walmart
yeah.
ad or something.
Right. Yeah, so like there's a lot of like features that aren't conducive and like it's like or you'll hear like lullabies, right? Like you buy some toy or some app for like lullabies to help your child, but it's like all like somebody's playing like a glockenspiel like really aggressively or something. It's like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, like that's not maybe how I would use my voice to soothe them. But yeah, so there is some cool stuff, like certain frequencies, like, and this stuff has a long tradition too, like singing bowls and like meditative types of sounds and sound therapy, sound healing, like, certain aspects, again, like loosely based in science, like lots of, frou-frou stuff going on. But certain frequencies, particularly the ones that kind of match frequencies that are observed in the brain. If you put electrodes on the brain, like there are different frequency ranges that are prominent in the signal and that are, loosely associated with different types of tasks or different states, like relaxation, like being on task, focusing on a problem, definitely with like sleep, right? Sometimes some frequencies are associated with like neural integration. So, there are efforts to impose these frequencies on music in different ways. Like beating is one of the ways that this is done. Auditory beats, binaural beats, or you can also have monaural beats. Rhythm is kind of like this in a lot of cases, just simple, just musical rhythm. Um, and the game there is like really about trying to entrain those states in your brain, right? And support them. And there's some evidence that this can be effective as an anti-anxiety, as supporting attention, as supporting sleep. But it's early days. It's the kind of thing
Yeah.
you'd like to see replicated a bunch before you're prescribing it.
Yeah, when you're talking before about the various levels where your neurons are firing and they're trying to track the signal, it feels like there are like all these levels of frequency matching that need to happen, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
we got a couple questions. Jennifer and Deborah. Jennifer's just saying that she imagines that there's probably a big variety of you know music that's helpful. Like if you're 17 now, your music preference is going to be different than if you're 40, something like that. Um, and then Deborah's also had like related question: are there any specific genres that have been tested to help with anxiety, depression, um, and
yeah, yeah,
how subjective can we get with this?
yeah. Um, Yeah, so there's an interplay here. One thing I'll say about genre is that, like, it is how we think about music, it's how we culturally engage with music, and it's valuable in that way. It helps us kind of curate and sort through what we like, but it's also like really like from a like acoustic point of view, like it's really kind of impossible to sort music in these ways because you'll have all kinds of energy levels in rock music or classical music, right? You'll have all kinds of variability in different important parameters, right? Like the timbre or the spectral brightness or like the rhythms, like so, genres are like really diverse and overlapping, you know?
Hmm.
So,
Just
so
like music and speech.
yeah. So like you'll find songs that help you calm down in different genres. Um, and they tend to also have overlapping qualities. So like try to think about like if you're looking for music that's going to be anti-anxiety, for example, individual preference matters, but so do things like tempo, and kind of the tone that's being like, are these soft tones? Like if you're playing a xylophone, like are you using padded mallets or are you using like rubber mallets, like um are you what is the tempo? Like is the tempo EDM like dance music, or like metal, or is like the tempo chilling out, calm, relaxing? Uh so there's a lot of intuition that goes into this too, and there's also it's supported by evidence and science. Um but yeah, so just I would say that it's not so much about genre as much as it is about like kind of acoustics and parameters. And again, like that derive probably from the voice, I think, right? So like what does your voice sound like when you're really angry,
Yeah.
really like aroused versus like when you're calm? Um, and sorry, the other question, the first question was about
Oh, it was just about, that preference is probably not universal.
right.
But I guess you did, it's an interplay, right?
Yeah.
Like they're
Yeah.
probably, just like going back to the music and speech thing, there are probably centers of agreement and they shade into each other. So like, um, like Ali mentioned Zappa and jazz. There's probably like if you're listening to jazz fusion, like maybe most people wouldn't think that's like super calming, or like if it's really frenetic or something.
Yeah.
I love it, but I wouldn't say it's calming necessarily. I feel like fast
Yeah.
tempos and like craziness and stuff like that. But there are
Yeah.
probably there may be a small subsection of people who do find it that.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Like, yeah, like extreme music listeners, right? Like people who are into like death metal or something, right? Like
Yeah.
I tend to like maybe the range is just shifted. Um, but yeah, I think there's some interesting things going on there.
Yeah. And San asks, how we can incorporate music into therapy. Is music primarily used as a reward? Can it be effectively incorporated into therapy activities? Yeah, I definitely feel like absolutely some of the things that you've talked about already, you can use it as a reward, and that's neurobiologically supported now that it does activate this reward circuitry, but it can also be used, during activities to increase focus, depending on the music, if I'm getting that right. You can help to regulate emotions. And maybe that's something that you can talk about a little bit more, because I know you mentioned in the UCLA talk, one of the kind of treatment paradigms that you're working on. It's really cool how you can use the ISO principle that they talk about in music therapy. A lot of music therapists use this, but it's not like, just because a music therapist does it doesn't mean we can't use it. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so like there are, music therapists, right, who've been using music therapeutically for like a long time. Yeah. Like this has its origin, music therapy has its origins like post-war, like like psychiatric treatment for veterans, like inpatient, treatment for shell shocked and also in special education. So it's an old discipline, and it's very variable. It's skilled music therapists who are often musicians and therapists who like are engaging with individuals and like adapting and using music in their treatment. And so it's very diverse. But there are also some like kind of core principles that like have been around for a long time and that, music therapists consistently use and talk about. And, there's been while music therapy has a lot of clinical validation, there are hundreds of controlled trials and there are meta-analyses that show that it's very effective in conditions like depression or anxiety, autism, schizophrenia. But so there's these core principles. So like something like ISO principle. So like ISO principle, and it's kind of intuitive. but it has this kind of fancy name. But it's just that you are trying to, with music, if you're going to try to use it to modulate somebody's emotion, you basically start by meeting them where they're at musically. And once you've built that kind of bridge of like uh, trust, empathy, understanding, then you try to move the music towards whatever your therapeutic target is, right? So like if let's say you're in like a really low energy state and you're depressed and you're lethargic and you can't get out of bed, and I hit you with up tempo like pop or dance music, right? It's going to be annoying, you know?
It's like
Um,
jumping into a cold shower or something.
yeah, yeah. So, I think this ISO principle approach would instead be like, okay, let's start with music that's super calm and even maybe emotionally negative, right? Like, um, lethargic and slow moving and expressing a kind of depression, you know. But then to gradually, as you kind of pull the listener into that communicative dynamic, then like you can start to introduce a little bit more energy, introduce to harmonize some tones, to pick up the tempo.
Mm.
Um, and so there are efforts to kind of try to standardize that process to a certain degree. I mean, I think there's tremendous value when the music therapist there and can read your cues and like feed off of that and like, but I guess one of the major problems for expanding care is there aren't that many music therapists. So there's only like 11,000 in the US roughly, give or take. And like that's great, but it's like you can't access that. Like there
Hmm.
are, 65 million people with mental illness. So, it's a non-starter. So we need to like take some of these principles and make them more available. And so, um, some of my research is centers around like the creation of music that is designed to move people between emotional states. And I do this in collaboration with an industry partner. Um, so, just for full transparency, like I like have stake in these companies. So like I don't want to, you know, act as if that's not the case. But the interesting part of this is like this company Spiritune, for example, like what we've done together is like engage composers, and it's essentially like technologists, neuroscientists, and there's a very good music therapist on the team, and we engage amateur and professional musicians to create music that moves between emotional states. And the emotional states are based on acoustic parameters that are derived from music cognition, music psychology, music neuroscience, and also voice and vocal affect, right? Like that's really my foundations. Like, what does the voice sound like if you're anxious? What does the voice sound like if you're energized and positive? What does the voice sound like if you're talking like this because you're depressed and so like
Mm.
this is a major basis for deriving some of these principles. And then um, it's funny, like the composers are like so good at it, you know, like you give them a list of parameters, and I was kind of like, there's no way this is gonna work, like all these words on paper, like, you know, but the composer's just like, oh yeah, like this is how it works. Obviously, it's so nice to have these parameters, and they just like create this music, and it's like, whoa, this is good, and then
Awesome.
because there's this like understanding, right? And then through iteration, like we get to something that's pretty cool, and we've tested this music um, like against other forms, like in the context of a focus, like a focus task. People are doing some task on a computer, and we play either this kind of ISO music or pop music, like the kind of thing, Billboard Hot 100, like kind of thing you'd hear on the radio. Um, or we play like it was interesting. We played like Spotify Deep Focus, you know.
Mm. Hmm.
Uh, and we played like office noise, background noise, and like I was again surprised to see that like this ISO music like generated better improvements in mood. It generated improved reaction times. Um, and there are reasons for that, like the deep focus music lacks rhythm. So
Hmm.
uh, it's not like you can't really like engage and use it for like motivation and forward movement in the same way that you can when there's a clear groove. But maybe it's better for like synthesizing or deeper focus, tasks.
Right.
Um, pop music is obviously not designed to help you focus, right? Like pop music is designed to like maximally grab your attention. So, um, yeah, but just these
Yeah.
nuances, like different types of music, different functions.
That's so cool. Yeah, it seems like a bit of a we become uh, conductors, maestros in a way. Like once you know that you can use music as a tool to potentially, help facilitate kids learning, it's kind of cool. You can experiment, uh, and there are all these tools at our disposal. But yeah, it sounds like this one would be a great resource for educators just in general. I just wanted to touch on rhythm. We did have one question, wanting to know a little bit more about rhythm, and there's all these, man, there's so many things I want to ask you about. But yeah, I probably save it for another time. But for speech therapy, I know that I've often used rhythm games as a way to increase social bonding. Do you know of any? Um, have you thought about that in kind of medical terms? Is there? I know that there's some evidence. Like they bounce these babies on time with um, a researcher, for example, and they're more pro-social. But yeah, have you thought about this as well?
Yeah. So like super interesting. Like this is like one of the major adaptive hypotheses for music. And it kind of centers around rhythm, right? That like music helps us do things together. It helps time our behavior together. And that when we move together, when we coordinate our behavior, it supports affiliation, social bonding. And there's like a big literature where they've done this kind of where they've done these studies and shown like simple stuff. Like you go into the lab and you're tapping your finger and like somebody on the other side of a divider is either tapping in time with you or not, and like you like the person who's tapping in time with you more, or the bouncing babies, like same kind of thing, walking around campus, walking in step, not walking in step. um, there's all kinds of interesting things like this. There's also
Yeah,
like singing together, right? Like um like military drill, like those groups of soldiers who are training and walking around, singing together, walking together in time, using music as a rhythmic stimulus to coordinate their behavior, like they bond. So yeah, and from a medical perspective, like this has been investigated in different ways, like uh, oxytocin physiology. Like the oxytocin is like the love hormone, um, and it facilitates bonding, it modulates reward, So, um, yeah, music has this quality, and it's basically because of rhythm. And one of the
yeah,
ideas is
that's really
that's
cool.
why music, that's what pushed music, that's what separated music from speech, right? So it's like it becomes more regular in time, becomes super predictable, and we really like it because it allows us to do things together, and that brings us together, and that's adaptive. One of the
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah, so cool. I remember I was hearing this researcher, Stefan Kolsch, I think, talk
Yeah.
about how, and you were mentioning emotion, how like kind of, music, it modulates your emotions kind of more effectively in some ways than speech does, because speech has to kind of go through this propositional thing where you're convincing someone to feel some way, but music can kind of just like make you feel this way. Kind of like when we were talking about infant directed speech in the very beginning, where like the musical aspects of the mother's voice or the caregiver's voice, like can you can definitely modulate the emotions of your child. And so like he's making the argument that music is kind of like this super expressive signal that captures the um, and exaggerates the emotional aspects of speech in the same way that like a mother's voice does. And I imagine that, yeah. Oh man, I forgot my point now. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no, but yeah, yeah, distillation of key communicative components of speech, and then exaggeration, right?
yeah,
Even just vocal range, amplitude, like that's what's going on. Like these are important signals that communicate emotion in the voice. We're going to take them out and we're going to blow them up, and like that, I think goes a long way towards explaining the power.
yeah. Do you know if there's any, and this is like highly speculative, but if there's any, because sometimes we work with, maybe either autistic kids that have trouble hearing emotion and voice. Like, might music and hearing emotion in music be like again like that scaffold to hearing that emotion and voice if this is
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. That's like, yeah, some of my research focuses on that in particular. And, yeah, I think that's like an idea. And there's all kinds of music therapies for autism. And, kind of again, scaffolding and trying to like interface uh, kind of limbic brain circuitry with auditory processing. Like that maybe that connection is somehow impaired in some individuals with autism, and like um, maybe through kind of musical stimulation, you can kind of help bring those things together, change the degree to which they can couple. Um,
Yeah,
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 you know, and it's a weird thing though too, right? Like some kids with autism are like super musical, right? And like really enjoy. Um, Yeah, music is it's very complex. Uh,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, thank you so much. I wish we could talk for like another hour, but we are nearing the end. I just wanted to make sure I get to a couple of questions and then, close it out for anything that you want to share with us. But yeah, so Jennifer, getting back to your question, not addressing rhythm specifically, but using rhythm and voice in speech therapy. What rhythm, like kind of um, just summarizing what we just said, so rhythm can help with social bonding. So I've used this a lot with kids. If I have a social group, I'll do a music activity with them in the beginning so they can, rhythmically entrain, and then they're likely to be more pro-social, mediated by oxytocin, maybe. And then, using voice, it's like because voice carries all these emotional signals, music can be a way to like emulate that voice. So that was kind of what I was getting at with Jennifer's question. Deborah's asking really quick about different languages, different languages having different tempos, rhythms, and intonations, and wondering if there are like, universal principles that underlie them. Um, and I imagine so. If we sort of, I remember hearing this. This is more music focused, but Sam Mayer did this study on lullaby. Actually, there's a lullaby one. Then there's like they're asking these kids about um, how to like map different musics, like
yeah, yeah,
what emotions they fit
yeah,
into, and like they did not get better with experience. It was like like the 3 year olds did just as good as the adult. They all like knew, somehow that there's this um, there
yeah,
are these like emotional mappings. So I don't know if you
yeah,
definitely
yeah,
know
yeah,
more than me, but it seems like there are universal principles.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like there are a lot of commonalities, right? Like just simple stuff, right? Like what do we sound like when we're yelling, Like what do we sound like when we're crying? Like what do we sound like when we're depressed? Like these things are the voice changes in these ways because it's physiologically constrained, you know?
Yeah,
Like when your body does certain things and your voice is part of your body. And so like um there are universals to be sure. Um it's not just in talking to babies either, right? It's like how we talk to each other, right? So like I can say whatever I want to you, literally, but if I say it with a really nice tone, like you're going to take away from the interaction like a positive feeling, right? But if you're like, hey, Garrett, like it's really great to see you again. It's like despite my words being like super, kind and meaning one thing, like you're going to be like, ugh, like that's not true.
not having this guy on again.
Yeah, right, right. Like it's such a big part of communication, you know,
Mm,
prosody
mm,
and music and teaching about that.
absolutely. Julia is asking, is there specific research supporting how language and prosody are developed using um, repetitive song? Um, do you know of any? I know that there's a lot of research that supports that. Like one of the other researchers we had on, Nina Kraus, has a lot of work on, um, you know, music experience and language ability, and they're closely tied. So, but I don't know
Yeah,
if you had anything.
yeah. I'm not really an expert in that specific like developmental piece. Um, but yeah, I think like I think Nina's work in particular, like kind of demonstrating these effects, like these cross domain effects, where you like musical training can support your like pitch and intonation and like um, I think the really interesting stuff is like also about like prosody and like emotional, like prosody and melody,
Mm.
but I don't really know of like any like focused efforts to be like to really make the mapping clear, right? Where like take speech, right? Take your speech and then like auto tune it, or like really
Right.
try to like make it very explicit for children, for example, you know. Um, I've done some stuff that I'm trying to push in this direction. Um,
Yeah.
Recording from the larynx and like making electrical recordings from the larynx that don't have any of the speechy stuff, but like have the emotional tone and kind of like seeing how kids with autism perceive those. Um, as opposed because like there you don't have this like crossing of signals, right? Like it's really confusing for a kid with autism if like somebody says something and literally means one thing but the tone says something else, right? Like this kind of like dual
Mm.
signal can be a problem. So, um,
Mm.
I don't know. Like it's just we don't know. Like there's so much variability in autism. Like what can maybe a lot of kids with autism are just fine in their understanding of emotional tone. Like their understanding of music might suggest that.
Mhm.
Like maybe it's only when it becomes in this social context and like, it's very complex and nuanced and goes against language. Like maybe that's where it gets really tricky, and which we all like train up on like really intensely, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, yeah, I suppose it could be so like maybe if you look at the subcomponents, since there's so many different aspects of sound that you have to process, like, like the fundamental frequency is like, so for certain people, or I think it was, athletes or something like that. No, 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 I'm sorry, bilinguals, they have higher, they process fundamental frequency um, with more fidelity, but not the harmonics. But then musicians process the harmonics better.
Oh,
So like
cool.
so there are these ways that they are dissociable. So I wonder if like there's kind of the anecdote of kid with autism who's imitating a like a fridge noise or something like that they're getting the pitches right and they have perfect pitch. So maybe they're processing that pitch information, but the harmonic information that contains the emotional content, maybe that's impaired. I don't know. It's all speculative,
Yeah,
but um,
yeah.
and KK, I will send over the UCLA lecture if that's okay with you. I know it's on YouTube.
Is it? I
Um,
couldn't find it recently, but that's great.
I think I got it. So let's see. I have it here. While I'm searching for it, thank you so much. You're such an inspiration, doing amazing work, important work for the world, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Any place that if people want to get involved that they can find you.
Forthcoming website.
Okay, got it.
Um, yeah, and feel free to reach out to me at Stanford if you have got some particular interest. You can definitely look me up online. Um, yeah, thank you, Garrett, and thanks to everyone for being here and um, putting this together. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, any last remarks or conclusions you'd like to leave us with?
Um, well, one quick thing I'll say is I hope this doesn't put a damper on it, is like listening to music's not necessarily healthy. So, just like music's a powerful stimulus. You use it in a lot of different ways. And
Mm,
you can use it to perseverate on or stay in your negative emotional state and you know, um deep in sadness. So
I feel like I've done that in my emo days.
yeah, right. So like that's real. Um
Yeah.
so there's ask yourself if it's hurting you, if it's helping you, try to use music in ways that it helps you. Get in touch with your subjective side, take it seriously, and um, try to leverage that in your own life.
Yeah. Great. You heard it from the source, folks. Getting a ton of thank yous, and yeah. So just thank you very much, and thanks to everybody. Take care. Stay curious and hope to see you in the next episode. And if you have a license that requires live CEUs, just make sure you go to the website, speechtherapypd.com, and make sure you submit the course. Yeah, thank you very much. That's it. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.